Futures in Fundraising is presented by Alexander Haas. Alexander Haas, transforming institutions that transform lives.
So hello, welcome to Futures in Fundraising. I'm Cynthia Hayes with Laddering Works, and I'm here with David King, President of Alexander Haas. And today we're going to talk about how to choose the best fundraising counsel for your nonprofit. So where do you start with that, David? Seems like a huge task.
I mean, we can make this really short. You should just hire Alexander Haas.
Right.
But if you're not willing to just do that right off the bat, I think the first thing that people need to do is really do some internal soul searching and figure out what it is you really need. Fundraising counsel can take a lot of different shapes. There are a lot of different services. And in our case, we tend to customize services based on what the client needs. But it's a lot easier for us to do that if the client can articulate what they need. So I think that's the first thing is figuring out what it is you feel like you need. And then from there, beginning to compile a list of consulting firms who can deliver what it is that you need. So a little bit of research on the front end, website research, maybe asking, some colleagues or friends who they've used, but try to sort of put together your long list, of people who you feel like can do the work that you need done.
Okay. And how do you go about maybe narrowing that list down a little bit once you have this?
So I think once you've identified a group of people who you feel like can do the work, the next step is figuring out who can do the work with you. Okay. So what we like to have happen when we're on the sort of receiving end of this process is we like there to be a phone conversation early in the process where the organization can call, talk about what they need. We can talk about how we would approach it. We can get to know a little bit about each other. They can learn more about us. Philosophically, how we approach things. We can learn about them, what their history and background, and specifically their fundraising experience has been, and try to figure out, we're trying to figure out, and they're trying to figure out, does this feel like a fit? Just from the phone conversation piece. So often through that process, an organization may be able to take their long list of people who can do the work down to a shorter list of people who have an approach to it that seems right for my organization. Right. And this is somebody I feel like I could work with, through the process.
So the chemistry matters.
Chemistry does matter. The people have to be able to do the work. But,
yes.
but is there a chemistry? And the approach matters. How do they how are they going to approach the work? Is it something that's going to work in my organization? Whether you're talking about a capital campaign or a feasibility study or annual fund plan development and counsel or major gift plan development and counsel, or even, someone to train and mentor staff. Is the way they approach things going to resonate with the culture of my organization and try to figure that out? So kind of chemistry, but maybe a little beyond that, just do we get along?
Yes.
But organizationally, are we going to fit together well?
Are we aligned in the way we would approach this?
Yep.
Yeah, because you're going to be spending a lot of time with your end partner, right?
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah. So, all right, you've narrowed your list down to counsel you think would be a good fit for you. Then what?
The next step for most people is to get a written proposal for that scope of work, whatever the identified scope of work is. These come to us in a wide variety of formats, some of which are quite unpleasant to deal with, frankly.
Why is that?
Well, some organizations treat the process of hiring a consultant the same way they treat the process of buying copy paper. So there's these forms to be filled out. Half the questions don't really apply to to a professional services organization. Okay. They're very rigid in terms of this is the information we want. This is the format we want it in. It can only be 4 pages, and whatever. It essentially takes all of the customization and thought for the consultant out of the process. So this is what I want, and this is the order I want it in, and this is what you got to say, and you're limited to 3 pages. That doesn't give a consultant a lot of latitude to be specific to your organization and how they would approach you. It sort of forces everybody into this one box.
It sounds like everyone would end up kind of sounding the same rather than being able to show their unique
That's
difference
almost
in approach.
exactly what happens is you end up with a bunch of proposals that look exactly the same because that's what you asked for.
Right.
So it's better to be less rigid, identify the scope of work you're looking for, or even the problem that you're trying to solve, and allow the consultant then to offer a solution to the problem. You're likely to get different solutions offered, and you can then choose between some variants that you think will accomplish what you need to do the most. But the less rigid you are in what you're asking for when you're requesting proposals, the more you can really get thoughtful proposals back from consultants about how to approach something.
And what kind of timeline do you lay out, or what's the process for that?
So if you want people to give thoughtful feedback and thoughtful creative solutions to your problems, you actually need to give them the time to think
Yeah.
and be thoughtful. So, give people a reasonable amount of turnaround time to get you back a proposal so that they can be thoughtful. A couple of weeks is a good sort of minimum.
Okay.
More is often better if you can afford it in your timeline. What's not great is a week or less. You're usually going to get nothing but boilerplate if you do that because that's all anybody has time to do.
And I know for your firm, at least, you guys are fairly busy. So it's probably a good sign if a firm needs a little longer because they're actively serving clients, right?
You don't want to necessarily hire somebody who doesn't have anything to drop to work with you. And, you want to hire a firm that other people are hiring.
Yes.
That has some experience. I think where that becomes a bigger issue for us and for other firms as well is not as much as responding to proposal as often the next step after that will be some sort of face-to-face meeting and usually a presentation of some sort in front of a selection committee. And that is where there really needs to be some flexibility. So we'll sometimes get an RFP that says the selection committee will meet on X date at X time, and you need to hold that time. Well, that's great if that time happens to be free. But if you are a firm that has, a lot of clients and you're allocating time to clients, and our firm is always going to give a client commitment a priority over a new business commitment. It's just, it's sort of the core of who we are. Clients come first. So if you pigeonhole people into a specific time and date without having some conversation about whether that works, you're going to have people who just can't do it. So when you think about having those face-to-face meetings, give people, the more lead time you give people, the more likely the date is available. And if you give people multiple dates to choose from, the more likely you're going to get good participation. So be thoughtful of that the people that you want to hire are people who are busy. Who, not too busy, but have other work.
Yes.
You don't want to hire the firm that nobody's hiring.
Yes. That could be a red flag, I would think. Yes. So then when you bring in counsel to meet, who needs to be present in that kind of decision-making process?
So we often present in front of committees that are some combination of staff and volunteer leaders. We're big believers in using volunteers in fundraising and engaging volunteers in the process. So we most definitely believe in engaging volunteers and having them bought in. I think some organizations do a disservice to the volunteers they put on that committee by not giving them any criteria that they should be using to select counsel. So we've had conversations where we'll get a call after we didn't win a piece of business, and somebody will say, that everybody on the staff really wanted to work with you guys. We felt like it was a great fit, but the board chairman really liked that guy who was there for the other firm. And so he wanted that to work with that guy, so we hired them.
Yes.
Chemistry is important. We've already touched on that. But it's not the most important thing. So a decision being made, completely on chemistry, often the reason that a volunteer leader or anybody will default to chemistry as the decision-making variable is because they didn't know what the other variables were that they were supposed to consider. So we need to, if we're going to put people on a selection committee, we need to make sure that they understand our development function reasonably well, because otherwise, how can they evaluate what kind of consultant you need if they don't understand your development function.
Yes.
And they need to understand where you're strong and where you need, where you need help, where you need support so that they can evaluate it. Certainly, at least in the way that we work, there needs to be a good chemistry between consultant and client because we're very engaged, we're very hands-on, we really get in and sort of join the team of our clients. We feel like we work best that way. But the reality of the situation is that chemistry really usually needs to be on the staff and consultant side more so than the volunteer and consultant side.
Because the staff will actually be the ones interacting.
Most of that
routinely.
interaction on a day in and day out basis is going to be consultant to staff. There will certainly be interaction with individual board members and the board as a whole, but day in and day out, it's going to be the consultant and the staff. So that's really the chemistry that probably matters the most. But if we don't equip our board members with, to make a decision on other variables, they have nothing to go to but, well, I liked that guy better than that guy.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And then when we get back, we'll get more into the nuts of the criteria used to select counsel, and then we'll wrap this up. So join us in just a minute.
Two people that I have to say have been very influential in my fundraising career. One, Henry Clay Hoffheimer, who was in Norfolk, Virginia. He chaired my campaign at the hospital, and then he was also honorary chair of the campaign at Old Dominion University, where I worked. Magnificent individual, wonderfully generous, a very astute businessman, and a terrific solicitor. The second was probably my first boss in fundraising, who came to me at one point and said, "Would you like to be director of development?" And I thought, that'd be great. I'd love to be director of something. What's a director of development? In my early 20s. And I soon learned that meant you had to ask for money. Her name was Noelle Stanek, and she went from being a boss to a really close friend, and now we talk several times a week, even though we haven't lived in the city for many years. But again, incredibly knowledgeable, passionate, and wonderful in being able to reinforce and understand the basics of fundraising.
Well, welcome back. We're talking about how to choose the best fundraising counsel for your nonprofit. And David, you were just talking about how to equip our volunteers and selection committees well. How do we do that when they're trying to select fundraising counsel?
So I think what typically happens is a committee's put together, they're called into a meeting, they're probably given copies of the proposals in advance and maybe some other marketing materials, but that's about it. And then they sit in a room for several hours while a parade of consultants come in, and some use PowerPoint and whatever, they do a little dog and pony show. And then they're asked to choose one of them, and I've mentioned before, with given no basis by which to make that decision, it often comes down to who I like the best, whose tie I like the best, whatever it is. So I think one of the things that organizations can do is for the staff the staff probably really knows what they need. They may not yet know which firm they need, but they know what they need, where they need help, what they're looking for. So I think one of the things we can do to help our volunteers make better decisions and move away from just who I liked is for the staff to put together for them some selection criteria. Here are the things we're looking for. Here are the traits we're looking for. Here are the problems we need solved. Whatever the list of selection criteria are, so that those volunteers sitting in that presentation can listen for when those things are addressed, ask questions if they're not addressed, just the presentation, take notes on how firms respond to those, and have a sense of, is this a company that is in fact addressing the criteria, can meet the criteria that our staff says we need. I'm not a huge fan of, here's a criteria, score it from 1 to 10, because I think you lose some nuance with that.
Yes.
But given that, as opposed to just a beauty contest, I'd much rather have that. You know?
Right.
So there's criteria. How do you think this firm addressed these criteria? You know, either free-form notes, or if you want to do a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. But giving them something to look for and listen to, and to really evaluate how the firm fits, how they address the needs, gets you to actively listening for different approaches, which is hard to do if you don't know what are we trying to do.
Right.
But I think giving them those kind of criteria written down, asking them to take notes and listen for them, asking them ask clarifying questions if you don't feel like this was fully addressed. I think that really equips those volunteers then to be good, informed decision makers and not have to default to something that is not irrelevant, but it shouldn't be criteria
It's more
one.
subjective and not.
Yeah, and you know, as I've mentioned before, it's great if I'm the board chair and I love the consultant, but if the vice president of development doesn't love the consultant, that is not going to be a great, healthy relationship for the organization.
And it feels like that would also give everyone, then you're comparing apples to apples. Everyone's working from the same criteria, same knowledge base, so that when you come together to have a decision about, all right, who should we choose, you can say, oh, well, this one addressed this really well, but this one was a little weaker, and seems like a much more productive conversation.
Yeah, and it allows everybody in the room to be working from the same sort of songbook in terms of what do we need. Because if we do a great job in the nonprofit profession, in the development profession, of shielding our volunteers from, sort of the down in the dirt, in the weeds, in the mud aspects of development work. We don't want them to see all of that. We certainly don't want them to experience it when they're volunteering for us. We want them to have a great engagement. We want them to have a great experience soliciting gifts for us. We want to prepare them. We don't want them to necessarily see, all the stuff that goes into that. So when it comes then to evaluating counsel, they may not have a great handle on where we're high functioning and where we're not. But if we can point that out and give them criteria, here's what we as a staff are looking for.
Yes.
They can be much more helpful in terms of selecting counsel that's going to fit with what the staff feels like they need. And the staff, they know what they need.
Right.
Even if they can't articulate it perfectly, they'll know it when they hear it. So having them to lay out, here's the areas where we really feel like we'd like to have some work done, then that equips those board members to be informed decision makers.
So then if you think you've selected, this is the counsel we feel like we want to use, they feel like a good fit for our nonprofit, how do you go about making sure they are who they say they are and they can do these things?
Yeah. I think this, you have to check references.
Yeah.
Or you should check references, I believe. I mean, anybody can say they did anything, right? It happens all the time in the world around us. Somebody's resume says they got a PhD from somewhere and nobody can find a record of it,
Yeah.
So this stuff does happen. So you do need to check references. You can either check them as part of your cutting process. It doesn't have to be at the end after you've selected. You could do it after you've gotten proposals, check some references, see if everything they're saying checks out. Or you could do it, you can save yourself some time, I guess. Once you've narrowed it down and say, we want to work with this firm, then you can check the references and make sure that what the firm presented resonates with clients.
Now, would you only check references that they provide you?
I would never check a reference that anybody provides me.
Right.
When I'm hiring staff, when I'm hiring, a consultant to work with us, I never would check a reference they gave me, because one of two things is going to happen. Either most of the time, 99.9% of the time, that reference has been handpicked by the consultant,
right,
coached by the consultant, and is going to say exactly what the consultant wants them to say. It's going to be a glowing reference.
Sure.
Just like all the references you list at the bottom of your resume.
That's right. That's right.
You're never going to list the boss who fired you. So you're only going to get those glowing references, if you ask for references. I think what you need to do is you need to look over the client list that the organization provides, and you need to select some organizations to talk with. And either call the organization, call the development office, or ask the consultant, here's 3 or 4 organizations we would like to talk with. Can you give us a contact?
Okay.
That's probably the better way to go with it, because there's so much turnover with development staff now that, within a 3-year period, it could be that nobody we worked with on a staff is even there anymore, or the people we work most closely with aren't there because of the rate it's turning over. So I think handpicking the references you want to talk to, then asking the consultant for a contact who would know of their work, and checking those references will get you much better results than asking them for a list of people they think you should talk to.
Right. So you've checked references. It looks like a go. Any final steps or wrap up that you would take?
I think being considerate of the firms who participated in your process. So, yesterday I got an email from an organization who had decided not to engage us. And the email said, "We've decided to go with a different firm for a variety of reasons. Thanks for submitting a proposal." Well, given all of the work that went into getting to that point from our perspective, responding to their proposal, putting it together, spending our time and money to go in and do a presentation and everything else, something a little more personal with a little more feedback would be appreciated, for the firms you don't hire. Make that phone call, explain to them, try to give them some constructive feedback on why they didn't get hired. It may be that there's nothing they could have done differently, that another organization just had a better approach, did a better presentation, somebody liked them better. I mean, there's, whatever the reasons are, but if there are things that the firm that you didn't choose could have done differently or better, give them that feedback. Everybody wants that feedback. We're all trying to get better. But give them that feedback to all of the firms who spent the time to work with you on this process but didn't get hired. I just think it's sort of common courtesy, rather than an email, a 2-line email or a voicemail, "Hey, we didn't hire you guys," or sometimes I'll actually get mail that says that, which, but I think a little more feedback, and honoring the work that went into getting there on the consultant side.
Because you may end up working with them in the future, right? For different types of fundraising projects, or...
You could, you could end up not liking the consultant you hired and needing to go back out for proposals again. And if you didn't end the process well the first time, you might not get a lot of participants the next time around. You could leave the organization you're with and go to another organization that's already engaged counsel, and it's one of the firms who you didn't close the loop with well, and maybe they start out the relationship, with less than a great feeling about how that was handled. So, I have teenage kids, and they like to text everything, and, you have to counsel my teenage son sometimes that you can't break up with a girl in a text message. This really needs to at least be a phone call, and face-to-face would be better. I know, I know that's not how your generation works, but in sometimes it really needs to be.
These are crucial life lessons.
And I think for us on the consulting side, who have put a lot of time and energy and thought into responding to this and wanting to work with an organization, just break up with us at least on the phone,
Or in person, yes. All right. Well, good advice all around. Thank you, David. Thank you for walking us through how to choose the best fundraising counsel for your nonprofit. We look forward to joining you next time. Thanks.